Our lives are laid out on a road of bumps, turns, struggles, and more. How do we respond? How do we endure adversity for learning and growth? I'm Aubrey Johnson, and we'll explore these questions and more on the road to rediscovery. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Road to Rediscovery. I'm your host, Aubrey Johnson. The Road to Rediscovery is about reflecting on life lessons to learn and grow from them, and of course, pay it forward and uplift others who are struggling through dark times. Now, as a quick reminder, you can hear this show anywhere you get your podcasts. If you happen to listen on Apple Podcasts, we invite you to leave a rate and review. Otherwise, we'd love your input and feedback by sending us an email at roadtorediscovery.com, roadtorediscoverypodcast@gmail.com. That's roadtorediscoverypodcast@gmail.com, and we'll give you a shout out in a future episode. My special guest is a Tennessee Rule 31 listed civil and trained family mediator. Her practice focuses on mediations for family, health and elder care, civil and business, and conflict coaching. She's also a speaker, trainer, and author of How to Live Forever, a guide to writing the final chapter of your life story. Let's welcome Kimberly Best to the show. Kim, it's so great to have you here. Welcome.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here today. Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you. We are grateful to have you on. For sure, no doubt. So, Kim, if you don't mind, I'd like for us to first talk about your profession as a mediator and how we can apply conflict resolution to our personal lives and relationships. Then we're going to move over and transition, pivot, if you will, to the difficult task of end of life decisions, right? And for loved ones, and just the topic of dealing with death here in this life. So, if we can first start off by having you give us a clear definition of mediation, and from early on, what sparked your desire to pursue solving problems and resolving conflicts between people?
Yeah, thank you. Well, first of all, I think mediation is the best kept secret for conflict resolution
Hmm.
because I tell people I am very, very good at working in conflict and helping resolve conflict unless it's my own life. And that's that's the beauty of mediation is a neutral person
Hmm.
who's not for one or the other.
Hmm.
I personally say I'm for both sides
Hmm.
to help each side be understood, be heard, hear the
Hmm.
other person, and
Hmm.
design a better way forward that handles their conflict. It's an alternative to the legal route. It's so there's a lot of lawsuits going on these days, right? You know,
Yes,
from
yes.
everything from my neighbors bothering me to bigger
Mhm.
things,
Yes.
and it costs a lot. Attorneys are super expensive. There's attorney
Mhm.
mediators too. So,
Mhm.
but it costs a lot, and there's no guarantee that you're going to win or anybody's going to win.
Right.
This way, with mediation, whether it's legal or not, both people can decide what the outcome is and do decide. It's not my job to judge. So
Right.
there's no blame. It's not about fault finding. And it's confidential. What happens in mediation stays in mediation. So
Gotcha.
even if things can't entirely be resolved, I pretty much guarantee that it's going to be in a better place than where it is now, so long
Mhm.
as people are willing to listen and hear the stories of what's really going on.
Understood. Understood. That makes a lot of sense, and that kind of leads into my next question. If you can explain the importance of empathy, right, and the role that it plays in mediation.
Yeah, what a beautiful question. I think empathy for the mediator is one of our best tools. So for
Mhm.
me, I think it's successful because I work to put myself in both parties' shoes,
Mhm.
being
Mhm.
for both parties. So I understand where you're coming from based on your situation, your story, who you
Right.
are, and I understand the other party too.
Mhm.
And part of what the mediator is doing is trying to get you to understand the other person as well, which is empathy building too. Because in conflict, I have folks come in and say, he's a narcissist, she's a
Yeah.
narcissist, everybody's a narcissist. But the
Right.
truth is, when we're in pain, we're all narcissistic because then it's all about us. So
Yes.
we open a bigger space where you can see the other person as a human and
Hmm.
from their side and what their experience is, even though it's not your experience.
Hmm.
Now,
Hmm.
Aubrey, one of my favorite things that I like to share is in conflict, um, just because I don't agree with you doesn't mean I'm
Hmm.
against you. And it
Gotcha.
feels like the person is against us. So
Yeah.
we work to see a way to move forward better.
Gotcha. No, that makes a lot of sense. And one thing that I guess I'm receiving as far as a vibe and a theme in which you just explained that, Kim, is as a mediator, it sounds like you really need to have a talent for striking a balance, right, between the emotional
Mm,
end aspect of things and the factual aspect of things. Trying to have a cerebral mindset, but not be insensitive, and try to have an acknowledgement for the emotional element, at least between the parties,
mhm.
but not not let that direct the conversation. Would that be accurate or?
Yeah, you're truly on the right path. The thing that we know in mediation is
Hmm.
there isn't one truth. There's
Yeah,
you have to hold space for this is your truth and this
yeah,
is their truth. So to
gotcha.
some degree, it doesn't have to match up at all.
Hmm. Hmm.
If you're willing to understand where the other person is coming from.
Yes.
Yeah. So the
Okay.
feeling part, when you're heard, when you're acknowledged, when I understand the impact that this had on you, it opens a space where then you can move forward to resolution. But you
Yes.
can't until that happens.
Yes. Isn't that ironic? I mean, what the major irony that I get from this is, you know, it's so when you fuel the fire, okay, and there's a disagreement between two people, it is so easy for the two parties to fall into a tailspin where I call it the crazy cycle, where based on one comment, that triggers a response from the other party to retaliate, which then triggers another retaliation from from the first party, and then they're in this tailspin, right? And conversely, it can be productive and helpful if one party shows respect, dignity, compassion, and empathy, and that will breed the same from the other party in a lot of cases. We
Well,
just have to be, who's going to be the hero? Who's going to be the first one to step forward and to demonstrate that compassion, that empathy, and the respect to let them have their talking time and space, right, to express their point, and then we have ours.
yeah, that's very well said. It's about listening. It's about
Yeah,
learning to listen and
yeah,
not to listen for what is wrong, which is
right,
what we
correct.
typically do, what I disagree with. It's to
Yeah,
listen for what is right. It is to
yes,
truly listen to understand.
yes.
And because we all tell ourselves a story, we all
Hmm.
make up a story about
Hmm.
someone else's motives.
Hmm.
Well, I know why he's doing this, but we don't know that. So understanding that our stories are based in the past
Yeah,
and the future, the present is not the past. So
no.
being willing to hear it from a present and actually be willing to acknowledge that we may
Hmm.
not be right in the story that we've made up. And we probably aren't right because there's so many stories it could be. The odds of us getting it right are really very, very slim. So being
Right.
curious about what really is going on and then valuing the relationship.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's valuing yourself because it may not feel like that relationship is important to you, but
Hmm.
the outcome, who you are in that, is
Hmm.
going to be important to you. So
Yeah.
there's lots of reasons to do it better. And ironically, Aubrey, people learn better conflict skills for going through the process.
Oh,
So it's
100%.
yeah.
Yeah, I can totally believe that. I mean, I am no expert in the field, but in just hearing it, I can feel that that is how they learn, right? You
Mhm.
going through the process, having the disagreement, having the conflict, which means feeling some degree of pain too, I would imagine.
Right. So I say it is not easy to go through mediation. It is
Yeah.
not easy. There is a degree of pain, but
Yeah.
I do know that it's a whole lot easier than not dealing with a conflict because we have a short term work and discomfort for longer term peace and connection
Yes.
versus stuffing it or fighting, causing more harm and building up a pile. I call it a
Hmm.
trash pile of
Hmm.
hurt
Hmm.
that is really hard to sort out, to just even come back together because we've made so much distance between us over time. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree. In fact, as you were saying that, I'm I'm a guy of metaphors. I was thinking about this past weekend. My wife and I cleaned out our barn, and moving here to North Texas 8 years ago. Over time, that barn collected, and grew as far as stuff being in there, and just spending 2 grueling days on a weekend clearing it out. Right. I mean, just stuffing something and repressing it is not going to make it go away.
Mhm.
We had to deal with it, right? And
Right.
it looks so much better now. It's so much clearer. It's dealt with, and I kind of equate that to, dealing with the conflict. It's
Right.
important to deal with to continue living a better life.
Yeah, and the first step to that, I think, is to recognize that conflict is normal. Like
Yes.
so many people feel, whether sometimes it's a religion based feeling,
Hmm.
sometimes it's how we're raised, that we're
Hmm.
not supposed to be in conflict. But
Hmm.
conflict is a sign that something needs to change, or there's an unmet need, or an unmet desire, or we've stepped on someone's toes. And
Yeah.
all those things are bridgeable if we talk about them. So conflict is good.
Hmm.
It's just that we haven't learned how to do it well because who's taught us? That
Yeah.
you asked me at the beginning why I got into this field. And after a really difficult divorce, my brother pointed me in the direction of something called transformative mediation at Hofstra University. And
Mm,
I started learning about mediation and had this aha moment that we just haven't learned how to do this. I
I
mean, I
see.
say to people, what happened to you in your family of origin when you were the source of conflict? Did somebody sit down and say, "Hey, let's talk about this. Please tell me how you feel. Why did
Yeah.
you go this way?" No, we we have all kinds of stories of punishment or
Yeah.
timeout or
Hmm.
being screamed at, and that's what we learned about conflict. So if we
Hmm.
learn a better way, we can do it better.
Absolutely, we can, and I think it's that knowledge that you're imparting on the parties that work with you, and hopefully it's anecdotes that they can take with them, beyond the case or the mediation, I would imagine.
Yeah. So it is empowering. When I have a word for mediation, the word I want to use is empowering,
Mm,
because if you do away with the who's right and who's wrong, if you can put blame aside, because blame is a whole nother podcast,
yeah.
um, and just figure out what you want the future to look like.
Hmm.
You have the power to write your future. Now, things are going to
Yes.
happen you don't expect, but nothing's going to happen if you don't at least start trying to write.
Yeah.
So you get the say in how you want something to turn out, and
Hmm.
both parties do, or all parties do, and sometimes a
Yeah.
lot more than two people.
Understood. Understood. So, this next question I have for you, I'm going to apologize in advance because it's going to imply an absolute. Okay,
Okay.
and I'm not sure in this profession if there are absolutes or not, but there's a term in your profession. I'm sure you've heard this term. I'm going to bring it up. It's agree to disagree. Okay.
Mm.
So the question I have for you, Kim, is do you believe all conflicts can be resolved or compromised between parties?
Well, the first part of your question about the absolutes, a mediator's favorite words are "it depends." So,
Gotcha.
so can all conflicts be resolved to some level?
Okay.
And even if that resolution is, and just think about all our differences now, if that resolution is I don't agree with you,
Hmm.
but I know that your choice is you, and this is important to you, and I let you have that instead of
Empathy,
trying to
right?
convince you to do it my way.
Hmm. Hmm.
We haven't resolved what we disagree on, but we have certainly resolved the tension between us in that disagreement. So something shifts.
Yeah.
Now, always know, I tell you, it's different when you're dealing with personality disorders because
Hmm.
a lot of people, not everybody is willing to show up and be as honest as it takes. But it
Hmm.
never ceases to amaze me how people are willing to talk about their very deep pain and hurt if the space is safe.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So, most cases, yes, there can be some transformation.
Hmm.
Sometimes there's a huge amount of transformation. But if someone is so locked into, for whatever reason, not wanting to change what things look like, then it's
Right.
difficult. But
Right.
then, Aubrey, I can work with one person. We can work with one person to help them deal with the fact that that's not going to change.
Yeah.
And we're systems, right? Most of the time when there's a conflict, whether it's a family system or a
Hmm.
social system,
Hmm.
if one piece of that changes, the whole thing changes. So
Yeah.
you're not powerless in conflict.
Okay. Okay. Good. Good. Neither party is powerless in conflict.
Neither party is powerless.
And you
There
as a
can be
mediator.
power differentials, but it is my job to help level the playing field on that because it isn't good if one person has power over for whatever reason. And yeah, we can do that in
I
most
see.
cases.
Gotcha. Gotcha. And so I would imagine as a mediator in the very, very initial stages of um, a conversation or mediation, um, there's some ground rules and some expectations that you would need to set. Is that right?
Well, a lot of mediators will say yes, and some
Okay.
mediators will say no. And I will
Okay.
say it depends.
Okay.
I don't want to take your power away to tell you how this is going to go. But if
Yeah.
y'all start screaming, I will tell you how it's easier for people to hear you. But
Yeah.
if you start screaming at each other, I'm likely to say, is this working?
Oh,
And are you willing to try another way if it's not?
yes.
Um,
Yes.
so a lot of people do set ground rules.
Hmm.
I normally don't because I really have found that I don't need to. And one reason is I meet with both parties separately and
Yeah.
let them get out whatever feelings they're holding. And
Hmm.
I spend a good deal of time with them,
Hmm.
helping them get in a space where they can communicate without all that other stuff. Aubrey, I work for the Los Angeles City Attorney's Office as a volunteer side gig, and I do the
Hmm.
community police unification program,
Hmm.
mediations between Los Angeles community members and Los Angeles police. And it is incredible when you make the space to hear
Hmm.
and help people frame what it is that they really need or want to tell in their story without
Hmm.
getting in those spirals that you talked about.
Yeah.
It is transformational in settings that we don't even think that there's room to build bridges. So
I
it's
see.
pretty incredible.
Man, that's great. Oh, that is great. So I'm not sure how involved or if you even are in touch with any of the parties that you mediate beyond the conversation, beyond the mediation. But I was wondering if you have had any of your clients maybe come back and maybe communicate to you a lesson that they've learned from this mediation that they can maybe take with them and in improving their communication skills or their interaction and relationships with with people in their world.
Yeah, that's one of the really rewarding things on that. I
Mhm.
do have people come back. I also want feedback, what worked, what didn't for you. So I
Yes.
do send a feedback form, but I have people come back and I have groups come back. Things work until they don't.
Yes.
And we want to say, okay, this is the agreement. It should work forever. And I
Hmm.
tell people it works until it doesn't. And
Hmm.
when it doesn't, you need to renegotiate. So say
Yes.
you and your wife have agreed that dinner is at 5 o'clock, but you can't seem to get home till 5:30,
Right.
and she thinks you don't love her because you're not showing up on time.
Yep.
And yeah, so 5 o'clock worked for a while, but now we need to sit down and renegotiate because it's not working
Yeah.
anymore. Because we'll lock people into something they said 6 years ago, when in
Yes.
fact that's not even relevant anymore. So
Right.
people do come back. I believe they come back because it is safe. I believe they come back because we expand. We only know what we know, right? And so
Right.
putting our heads together, we can come up with more possibilities than this or this. Aubrey, almost always in conflict, people think they have two choices, yours and yours.
Yeah.
And my job as a mediator is to draw a line between those. And we can look at everything in between those two places to find more choices besides two.
That's a very visual and intuitive interpretation of your job. And anyone, no matter if I was one of the parties, no matter which side I was on, I can clearly see and understand that, right? And I hope the clients try to keep that in mind as far as what your job is, when having these discussions. So yeah. So thank you for clarifying that, and thank you for your mediation insights, Kim. I really, really appreciate it, and I'm glad to hear that you do solicit feedback, right? And they are comfortable and safe enough to come back to you and give you feedback and tell you how this is changed their lives, outside of the actual conversation itself. So that is huge, and it's something that just, I don't know, it just kind of proves, whatever your secret sauce is, it's working. and and it continues to work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the one thing I like about us in mediation is we're not over the parties, we're with them.
Yes.
It's in
Yes.
us. It's not me and them, it's in
Yes.
us. And
Hmm.
even the two people who have drawn the separation, the line between me or you, it becomes us. And
Hmm.
there is power in that.
Oh, totally, totally power. Because instead of like adversarial, us and them, which implies adversarial, even though you're not, saying it's us, that's a larger number, and there's strength in numbers. And not only do you express that, but you demonstrate that in how you talk with them, and it's everything is equitable. You're not favoring one side over the other, and there's even small implications that some people who are hypersensitive can claim that that you're taking favor over the other party versus themselves, and I guess you have to be mindful of that too.
Yeah, so in the process, I say, uh, my job is to be impartial, but I describe myself as omnipartial. That means I'm for both of you, and really doing the empathy thing and standing in um, each person's shoes. But I also say, if you experience me as not being for you or for someone else, please let me know, because it's
Yep.
something we're checking for all the time.
Sure.
And a little secret, I've never said in a podcast, but for me, it really is kind of a sacred process when people are sharing with you things they don't share with anyone because of shame
Right.
and not being able to make that space. So
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
go into it with a prayer for grace and wisdom. And
Good.
during the process, it's I pray for grace and wisdom. And I think that space opens up. It's not my problem to solve, it's my
Mhm.
problem to help them make space to solve. And it
Got it.
seems to work.
No, yeah, it does seem to work. Yeah, yeah. And I was just about to get off of the mediation topic, but I don't know, I was driven to ask that last question, so I'm
Mhm.
sorry about that.
No problem, no problem. Ask
Oh,
anything.
oh, thank you, thank you. So now I want to pivot over to the difficult topic of life-ending decisions, dealing with loss, and those sorts of things. And to tee us off, if you can just give us a glimpse into your book, "How to Live Forever," and I sense there's a, I don't know, a subliminal or metaphorical representation or
Mm.
meaning behind the first part of that title. But if you can just give us a glimpse into what your book is about.
I'd love to. So it's funny. Sometimes people ask me what I do for a living, and I say I talk about the two things that people most don't want to talk about:
Hmm.
conflict and end of life. But I am still a registered nurse. I don't practice in nursing, but for a very long time, and I worked in every intensive care there is. I worked in trauma,
Yeah.
and ultimately the emergency department. And from
Hmm.
the first person I saw die, I'm a 19-year-old nurse, and I'm sitting at a bedside, and I pictured this person who is dying as a book, and
Hmm.
their ends coming together as the book was closing. And I
Mm.
wondered about their life, their story.
Yeah.
And that never changed in all the many years I saw many people die. It's still
Mm.
knowing that somebody's story ended and
Yeah.
wondering what they passed on. So
Mhm.
then I go into mediation. The one thing that was always hard in nursing is people don't have this conversation. And in
Right.
the absence of knowing what you want done and naming that, in the absence of that, medicine will err on the side of doing, and probably your family will too, which isn't necessarily in your own best interest.
Right.
So, me, the topics are still about empowerment. So, the book talks out first about the legal decisions that you need to make,
Hmm.
wills, etc.
Hmm.
Then the second part is on healthcare decisions, and it is to help people realize that it is their lives and not the medical system's lives. And you do have say, and you need to ask questions. And for me, I use quality of life is a way to decide how far are you willing to go treatment wise, because people sometimes die of the treatments, right?
Yeah.
So, what do you want your ending to look like? And Aubrey, you mentioned, terminal illness and stuff. I know from working in the emergency department, we don't know if we're going to die from terminal illness or we're going to die when we walk out the door. So I think
True.
we need to go ahead and have these conversations.
Hmm.
My next chapter after the healthcare is on leaving your story as your legacy, and there's a lot of forms to do that.
Hmm.
But it is true that when people are asked what they want left behind from their loved ones, like 90% want stories and wisdom, and only 10% want grandma's gnomes or something.
Yeah.
The stories are valuable. And then I talk about bridging the conflicts in families, because I want us to be able to have the opportunity to walk out of life with no regrets. So, what
Yes.
loose ends do you have that you might want to tie up so you can say, I did this well at the end?
Right. Right.
And then for all of these decisions, mediation is a tool to have these hard conversations with your loved one, or even to figure it out yourself, to have
Hmm.
space. Because a lot
Hmm.
of times people aren't willing to talk about it, and we are all going to die.
Yeah.
So let's do it the way we want our story to read.
Um, for someone who has made that transition from the emotional side to being a little more prepared and everything, and once their loved one has passed, what has their response or their feeling or emotional state have been?
Yeah, so you were talking about different sides of, making this decision. I think we go into a denial side. We're not supposed to
Yeah.
die. And we are
Hmm.
supposed to die. And
Hmm.
I think normalizing death so that we can talk about it, which
Hmm.
is like normalizing conflict so we can talk about it. When we shine a light on things that are in the dark, they're less scary. So the
Yes.
answer to your question is, I think it's been beautiful to watch people plan ahead, that you revisit the conversation as the process goes.
Hmm.
But there isn't regret then. There's greater peace for everybody, including the family you left behind.
Hmm.
A quick story, one of my favorite people I started working with, they did a football player who received a diagnosis of something that was going to leave him more and more paralyzed until eventually he died.
Hmm.
And he came to my office and he said, I'm going to have this illness. I'm good with God. My life is good. I'm just going to wait to die. And
Mm.
I said, well, that's an option. But you also could use this time. You don't know how long it's going to be. And my dad got a bad diagnosis and decided he would wait to die, and it took him 10 more years. So,
Wow.
what are you willing to do in the time that you do have?
Hmm.
And what do you want your kids to learn from watching you? Because you're
Yes.
teaching them how to die. So
Yes.
we went through, he wrote his story out. Got a book, answered questions, and we did all the planning. And then came the day where he was close to dying.
Hmm.
And we called in hospice nurses, and he interviewed a couple. And the family had a great sense of humor. So the hospice nurse stepped out, and he made a joke that I won't say on the air. His family started laughing. I left
Hmm.
the house almost in tears because here they were moving into hospice, and they
Hmm.
were so prepared they were able to laugh.
Wow.
And they could only do that because they were prepared.
Yes.
These people had been married like 40 years, the couple had.
Oh,
And
wow.
at the end, she said, I think I'm supposed to feel more devastated than I do, but I'm
Hmm.
okay. And I believe she's okay because they walked a process. They
Beautiful.
didn't say things should be another way, or
Yeah.
they didn't spend that time to go through the denial that's part of it originally, but they were so purposeful. We're
Yes.
purposeful in how we live our lives. I
Yes.
believe we need to be purposeful on how we live our lives all the way to the end.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more, Kim. And such a beautiful story, by the way, for them to be in a state to where they can actually laugh, and enjoy those last few moments with their loved one before he passed. And you're right. I don't think they'd be anywhere near the ability to laugh if they weren't prepared. So
Right.
yeah, no,
I,
that's a beautiful story.
I surveyed people before I wrote my book. It's like we all lost people, and some of us have
Hmm.
lost people that we know what they wanted when they got
Yeah.
sick. And
Hmm.
some of us have lost people where they're getting sick and we don't have a clue. And what a
Yeah.
burden that decision is because we don't even know what they would want. So
Right.
probably we err on the side of doing, which honestly can be torture. It just
Yes.
can. The thing about medicine now and the fact that it helps us on so many levels where it couldn't before also means that it's taking longer and it's harder to die. And that's
Yes.
painful not only to the person dying, but to the
Right.
family. So we have
Yes.
to pay attention to this. It is still your choice, it's not medicine's choice, but
Right.
we have to talk about it so that we know, just like conflict, what our options are on that
Yeah.
spectrum.
Yeah. Cause and effect, right? I mean, sure, the medicine may keep you going for a while, but then it makes it harder to die, and it may, I don't know, quote, buy time or something, but you still have to deal with the inevitable. you know.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And what
Yeah.
is that while like that you just bought yourself? Is it
Yes.
a quality while? And
Right.
only you get to decide that, and nobody else can do that for you. But
100%.
but let's talk about it because I did a survey on that. What is the
Mhm.
level that you want treatment? Your
Right.
life is worth fighting for you.
Yeah.
Where is that for you that you when you don't have that, you're like, no, I don't.
Yeah.
I need to just let it go and let nature take its course, and it's time to let go. And people ranged from everything from being able to pray to knowing their awareness to being able to walk to being able to eat ice cream, being able to watch football. So those are the things that's the bottom line of where I'm living well, because there's a difference between living and living well. It's the
Sure is.
existing or living well. And
Yes.
I don't think we should settle for existing because nothing is accomplished in that
No.
space.
No.
Except sometimes it gives the family time to make the adjustment. It is
Right.
true. But that adjustment would be easier to make if the conversation were had ahead of time.
100%. Well said. And I totally, totally agree. In the experience I had in losing my father back in 2006, and getting the arrangements and having that time to do so. And during that time and that while he made the choice to not just exist. Right. And so, yeah, it's an ideal type of closure, I guess I can
Mhm.
say, for
Well
lack
said.
of a better term. So,
That's
oh,
so well said. So, how was that for you, Aubrey, with your dad?
it was good. It was really good. I had some things I wanted to get off my chest with him regarding how he made me feel in certain parts of my childhood, And I thought I would just repress that and focus on just caring for him in the here and now, and not bringing that up from 30, 40 years ago. And my wife said, no, you need to do it, and so I went and had that conversation with him. And I felt so much better. And as the oldest of four children, he relied upon me to help get all papers in order, things that he had prepared with his estate for my mother in continuing as the benefactor. But certain things had to be done once, he passed on, and having a full instructive list of things to do when that happens, who to call, what are the numbers, where to go, what papers to get, where the papers are located, just all those details, right? And so he was very, very cerebral, very factual about his passing. He called it check out of here. When I check out of here, you want to make sure you have all this in order. And so it was an ideal closure. I miss him dearly. I wish he was still here. I've even had dreams about him, but
Mm.
you know, it was inevitable, and it had to be a type of closure. And to me, that was the ideal for it
You
had
have
to happen.
peace.
I
You
have
have
peace.
peace.
Yeah,
Yeah. And he
yeah,
did too. He did too. And I
he did.
think that's it. We can't control very much around our ending
No.
to a large degree. So let's
Mhm.
do what we're able to do so that we can, have that peace and know our loved ones have that peace.
Yes.
And yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. Well, Kim, I can't thank you enough for coming on the show. Is there a way that the listeners can learn more about the great insights you have on conflict resolution, and maybe even pick up a copy of your book?
Right. So the book is easily found on Amazon.
Okay.
Major booksellers can get it for you, but Amazon's good. And for finding me, my company is Best Conflict Solutions. So if you Google that, there are some things on conflict there, including some of the recent conflict that's happened in Nashville. So
Okay.
um, yeah,
Yeah.
together we can all make this better. We just have to start having conversations.
Again, strength in numbers and empathy,
Right,
compassion,
right.
all of that together makes us a formidable force for good. So, and you're leading that charge in the great work you're doing, Kim. So, thank you once again for coming on the show. I really, really appreciate you coming, and let's please stay in touch. If you write another book, love to have you back on.
I am actually starting another book. I never thought I would write another one
Oh,
because it was
great.
painful to write the first, but on
Oh, yeah.
conflict.
Uh huh.
Just kind of the things I talk on. I just yeah, put it on a book, and it's very interesting how people are. "Oh, I didn't know that,
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's good.
Yeah, fantastic. Then I'm going to keep that in mind then. All right. Well, thank you, Kim. And I want to thank all of you for tuning in and listening. And hey, look, if you have a loved one, a colleague, a coworker, friend, neighbor who just seems not to be themselves, maybe going through some dark days of despair, not quite sure where to turn or who to turn to, I humbly ask that you please share this show with them. Because on the road to rediscovery, we want our listeners to know two things. One, you're not alone. And two, there is always hope. The road to rediscovery, it's a movement, a revolution. And guess what? You are now part of it. We're all roadies on this journey of life. And it sure feels good having you on the road with me. Thanks again for listening. We'll chat again soon. We really hope you enjoyed this episode of The Road to Rediscovery. We'd love to hear from you. Shoot us an email at roadtorediscoverypodcast@gmail.com and leave us any questions or comments you may have.